I saw someone put on Twitter, there will always be tension in the Middle East so long as there are people trying to kill Jews and Jews don't want to be killed. It's not different from what Golda Meir taught us so long ago when she said if we have a choice between being dead and pitied and being alive with a bad image, we'd rather be alive with a bad image than be dead. Well, the war now is over. Israelis know what to do. They're used to war. They recover very quickly. But for the Jewish community here in the United States, we have to ask ourselves a real question. After what was just revealed to us over the last couple of weeks, we have to ask ourselves the question, where do we go from here? What was most scary about this war wasn't the rockets and the bomb shelters. We're used to that. It wasn't the riots in the streets of Jerusalem and other cities, or even the near outbreak of civil war between Israeli Arabs and Jews. We've seen that before. What was most scary about this war was the unrelenting attack on Jews, Judaism, and Israel around the world. If it's not anti-Semitism to protest this war, then why are Jews afraid in other countries outside of Israel? Why is there violence? Why are there attacks? Why are there Jewish kids in schools in Boston that are afraid to go to school and have to transfer? Israel may have won this war militarily, but we lost the media war and the social media war. Hasbara, diplomacy, as Israelis call it, and the narrative of a people is vital. We see what happens when a narrative goes against us. It's like a tidal wave that can't be stopped. It's demoralizing and painful. It leads to enmity and violence. And in a social media world that we live in, it can go completely unchecked. There's a story in the book of Genesis, chapter 34, where the daughter of Jacob, whose name was Dinah, was raped by a man named Shechem. She was abducted and taken to Shechem's home, and eventually Shechem said, I really like this woman. I think I'd like to marry her. So he asked his father, Hamor, will you go to Jacob and see if we can set up a marriage? Jacob comes to meet Hamor, whose son just raped his daughter. And Hamor says, my son would like to marry your daughter. And Jacob responds, but you're uncircumcised. You're a different people. Hamor and Shechem say, we'll get circumcised. And they go home and they get circumcised, and in a few days, they plan to have a wedding between Dinah and Shechem. In the meantime, two of Jacob's sons, Shimon and Levi, go into the camp, find Shechem and Hamor, and kill them both. Afterwards, once Jacob finds out what has happened, he confronts his two sons, Simon and Levi. They have been taught by Jacob that rape is a capital offense and that murder is the proper reaction. Jacob knows this, but he says to Simon and Levi, you've now brought trouble on me. You've now made me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and all the others, because my men are few in number, so that if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed. Jacob said, like we Jews say now, all the countries will come and attack us, and we are so few in number. That's what's happening now. There's a narrative that has been constructed against us, and there's nobody to defend us. There's one celebrity tweeting and posting against Israel who has more followers than there are Jews in the world. And the Palestinians have a compelling narrative. It's a narrative that they've been crafting for 100 years. It's a narrative that began with Haj Amin el-Husseini in Berlin meeting with Hitler, talking about what it meant to have a narrative. It's a narrative that was continued on by Yasser Arafat. It was a narrative that was studied by Mahmoud Abbas during his years working on his PhD on why the Holocaust was a myth. It's a narrative that continues now on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. It's a narrative that is flawed, unfair, biased, and filled with lies and propaganda. But it's a narrative that they've made fit with anyone, anywhere, who feels oppressed in any way. They've painted every Israeli as akin to Derek Chauvin, and every Palestinian as akin to George Floyd. And we Jews, with the deep pockets here in the States, are helping the Israelis to press the knee down on the necks of the Palestinians. If you don't believe me, go online. Look what they're saying. Go to the college campuses. Go to the schools where it's happening. You can argue the war one way or another, but you can't make up your own facts. And what are the results? The results of peddling this narrative are a successful intersectionality, where those who are oppressed on the Palestinian side convince anyone who's oppressed anywhere that their struggles are the same. And it's a numbers game. There are 1.8 billion Muslims. We are a people still trying to get back to where we were, around 18, 19 million before the Holocaust. They have mobilized their masses and their allies, which includes many governments on different parts of the globe. And they've convinced them to ignore all other issues. And this is truly amazing. For a people like us that control the media, we're not very good at controlling the media. They're not telling you to stand up and protest Russian hit squads that target LGBT citizens in Russia. They're not telling you to protest the Chinese concentration camps that are the home to the Uyghur Muslims. They're not telling you to protest what's going on in Venezuela or in Cuba. They don't care what you think about the Syrian regime who's killing its own people. They're not interested in North Korea's concentration camps. They, like the UN, are hyper-focused on one and only one issue. And a lot of times lately, when they sell their narrative, they've added a new paragraph that says, this isn't anti-Semitism, but. If you have to explain why you're not an anti-Semite, you're an anti-Semite. They don't realize it because they've bought into the narrative. They understand that by protesting what Israel does to the Palestinians is the same thing as protesting against white policemen who treat African Americans unfairly. They understand it as treating people at the border who are turned away or thrown into these terrible camps as the same as the struggle of the Palestinians. This is a moment of real disillusionment, especially for us liberal Jews who marched all summer, who were shocked to our core by George Floyd and the others, who were sickened by the rise of the radical alt-right that brought hatred to the forefront, who are now traversing the highways of Florida seeking to intimidate us, who were just in Miami last week trying to do this. But those we marched with, or those we sympathized with, or those we called, or those we promised we would learn about their struggle. Unlike after Pittsburgh, when all of them called us, when all of them couldn't wait to sit right here and be at our vigil, when all of them couldn't wait to be seen in this sanctuary so that they could be photographed and shown in the newspapers and on TVs how they stood by the Jewish community, with the exception of our congresswoman and one member of the Pinecrest City Council, I have not heard from any of them. And their silence is deafening. Well, what can we do now? I believe that there is a very special moment. I believe that something happened over the last couple of years that we need to be aware of and now begin to use in promoting our own narrative. For so many years, this has been a racist country. We know that. But many of us were taught or told, even if you're not a racist, you're a racist, because you're not doing enough to be an anti-racist. So fine. They taught us that, and we learned it. We read these books. Every Reform rabbi in the country salivated over these books. How to be an anti-racist. Isabel Wilkerson, Can't Wait to Get Here. Tell Me About the Caste. We salivated over it. We believed it. We bought into it. And we committed ourselves to doing what we could. Who was the only rabbi that was downtown in Miami during Corona with a loudspeaker? Rabbi Greengrass. I was afraid of Corona. But she was there. We bought it. We believe it. We like this book. I quoted it on the High Holy Days. But where are they now? Why don't they see us? I don't mean the Israeli versus the Palestinian narrative. I mean the anti-Semitism. Why aren't they saying that it's not okay to attack Jews in Los Angeles or Jews in New York? Why aren't they saying that it's not okay to spit on Jewish students as they walk in the hall? Why don't they say that it's not okay to alienate our sons and daughters on the campuses of this country? Well, maybe it's because we haven't written this book. Maybe it's because we haven't written how to be an anti-Semite. Maybe like we learned that we did have problems with racism even though we're not racist, that they don't know that they're anti-Semites, even though they may be. Just as they taught that those who don't realize that they are racist are anti-racist, we must go now and teach America not just to be silent, imagine what Elie Wiesel would say about that, but how to be anti-Semites. We need to teach them that when they obsess about Israel to the exclusion of real violators of human rights, that's anti-Semitic. When they keep silent, as we are being pounded on social media and in the news, they perpetrate anti-Semitism. When kids in schools are afraid to go, when college campuses have become unsafe spaces and they are silent, then they are not anti-Semites. We've been taught how to be anti-racists. We recognize the problem. We read these books. We marched with you. Now we need to teach. For 2,000 years, a narrative of anti-Semitism has been written, and believe me, we have the material to teach how to be an anti-Semite. The time for us Jewish Ibram Kendis has arrived. May we be ready to meet this challenge. Amen.